there will be no parallels to 1994. But now, this is the Panthers' time, as they are now in the Stanley Cup Final for the second consecutive season.
You're Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into the Sunday, June 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez from the Hockey News. You can follow me on X at MondoMan12, follow the show account on X and Instagram at @LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. So the Florida Panthers go into Emirates Bank Arena and defeat the New York Rangers by a final score of 2-1 to clinch their spot in the Stanley Cup Final for the second consecutive season. And it was a game where the Florida Panthers delivered the knockout punch, where through 40 minutes, the talk was about the defensemen for the New York Rangers having more shots on goal than the forwards. The Panthers really locked in against the Rangers. Panarin got a goal towards the end, but it was too little too late for his first goal of the series too. And with that, Sam Bennett coming through and Vladimir Tarasenko breaking an 8-game goal drought, the Panthers have now clinched their spot for the second consecutive season. In the 30-year history of this franchise, it is the best time to be a Florida Panthers fan, and we are witnessing great history for the Panthers. And here to break down this 2-1 win for the Florida Panthers over the New York Rangers, and to discuss more about the Eastern Conference Championship, everything in between, he is the former host of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and from Panther Parkway Radio, he is Frank Rekas. Frank, welcome back to the show, my friend.
Thanks for having me, and it's a great night. I'm glad that we can be here to be celebrating a fantastic victory.
Yeah, no doubt. Celebrating a victory for the Panthers, and also with just the journey that Florida has gotten to get here, with adding more depth to their blue line, with the freed up cap space, the mission that the falling short for the Panthers with health, and even discussing it yesterday, how Eric Stahl was up a line, Matthew Tkachuk not finishing the series, Aaron Ekblad playing with 1 foot, which Aaron Ekblad spoke about even after the game, how the team is a lot healthier coming into the Stanley Cup Final. But putting a little bit of a bow on the series for the Florida Panthers against the Rangers, I mean, it's just continuing to stick to what they know best in protecting the house and just getting the puck out. And even with the shot attempts for the Rangers, this was one of the few games of the series that the Rangers actually led in shot attempts. But it has gotten to the point in the series, Frank, where even with the pressure that the Panthers had with the Rangers, there are more shot attempts that were missing the net than the Panthers getting in the shooting lanes for the Rangers. So it was really about that last ditch effort of just trying to throw spaghetti at a wall and hoping for it to stick this time. That's kind of the best comparison I could think of when it comes to the desperation. I not for a single second do I think that the New York Rangers quit. That's just not the mentality of a hockey player or an athlete in any sport. But just the fact that the Panthers just really left their best for last. I mean, Lafreniere, a lot of goals in the series, for him, but no shots on goal for him too. And my goodness, what a finish. This was about the finish. We spoke about knockout punch. This was the 12th round getting there, and it was finally that last blow for them.
And I think a big thing was Panarin not scoring the entire series until tonight. I mean, when you look back, he's been goalless this entire series. I think it actually goes back. I think he had 8 or 9, or maybe it was 10-game goalless streak. Zibanejad has been invisible. Basically, he hasn't done anything. So you have to credit the defense of the Florida Panthers, the game plan that they have, and I think the intense forechecking that just probably drove the Rangers absolutely nuts. And Paul Maurice has done a fantastic job preparing these guys. They've bought into the system. They're hungry. You know, they were there last year. They want to go back and they want to prove that they belong. So you got to give them a ton of credit.
Yeah, no doubt. Lots of credit for them. And honestly, for me, like looking at this, Lafreniere had no shots on goal. Vincent Trocheck had no shots on goal. Barclay Goodrow, who had three goals in a 2-game stretch in between games 2 and 3. Too. I mean, you weren't expecting him to get off on the score sheet. Also, the desperation of Peter Laviolette changing up his line, Matt Rempe not playing, Brodzinski coming in, Wenberg going on that first line wing for the New York Rangers, Philip Hedl going into that third line center role too. That's another thing for the Rangers and the Panthers, and just the desperation that was on one side, but then the Florida Panthers, just the calm, cool, collective nature that they're consistently have throughout the locker room. Even Sam Bennett in his pregame interview saying, we're going to be okay. We're not worried. And the thing is, people think that's lip service. I really don't think that's lip service when it comes to just worrying about one game at a time, not looking ahead. And even the Panthers, if you were to, it's funny, I had a YouTube comment that I had not replied yet to. The question was, who do you think the Panthers would play, Edmonton or Dallas? When I go back to my comment is just going to be this one word. Yes. That's going to be the one word. So, but I also think that's the mentality of the Panthers too. Just every little one shift at a time, and even in intermission, one moment at a time, when the players are talking amongst one another about how the communication style is going to be too, going into every shift, every practice, every video session, everything with this Panthers team. It's just a team that has a good head on their shoulders.
I think it's just confidence, and not in an arrogant way. I think they know their game, they know what they need to do, and they support each other. They've all bought in. They're playing as complete as a team as I've seen a Florida Panther team in all the years I've been watching the Florida Panthers, and it's been a hell of a long time from day one. The thing that I think sticks out the most is the togetherness that they've had for this unit, even though they've got 3 or 4 new players that they picked up to start the year, with Ekman Larson being one of them. I'm drawing a mind blank on
Nicola
on the fourth line. Yeah, him. It's just everybody's bonded together, and I got to tell you, I love Sam Bennett. His clutch goal today to get them on the scoreboard. I really like his style of play. He's my kind of player. Gritty, goes to the dirty areas, can score, can play defense, gets under your nose a little bit. Not too much, but just enough. And I think that's one of the epitomes of this team. They tick you off. They get under your skin. They play a hard game, which we haven't been able to say that about the Florida Panthers in a really long time. And this is hockey. It's not ballet, right? You got to play hard. And especially when you get to the playoffs, it's even harder. And I love the way that they're playing. And I was never worried. I had a friend at the game. He's texting me, this game is making me nauseous. I'm nervous. I'm like, just relax. We got it. And, we got that second goal, and I think he could finally relax in his seat.
It's funny because even years going back to just when you hosted the show along with Josh, and even in our group chat, when even gonna call this man out a little bit, Jacob Winans in our chat can be a little out there when it comes to like how he reacts prior to games, and then you're thinking, boys, it's fine. It's going to be fine. This team knows how to figure it out. They don't let the moment is never too big for them too.
Yeah.
So that's another thing when it comes to this Panthers team continuously for them about how how they get to 1 point versus another. But we're going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to discuss more about the Panthers' road to get here, and also that the Panthers have done one thing that hasn't been done in 15 years. What is that? We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. And Game Time is making the NBA and Stanley Cup Final tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off or puck drop, with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and a view from your seat. Their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA and NHL tickets. With flash deals, you could save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of the game or event. Save even more when you choose a section and let Game Time choose the seats. You could get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. It's the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Segment number 2 here on this Sunday, June 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you the can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Back here with Frank Rekas, the former host of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast and Panther Parkway Radio, here to break down this 2-1 win for the Florida Panthers over the New York Rangers to clinch their spot in the Stanley Cup Final for the second consecutive season. So, Frank, this thing I want to discuss with you with the Florida Panthers, something that hasn't been done since 2009. A team that had lost the Stanley Cup Final has made their return back to the final stage. When the Pittsburgh Penguins lost to the Detroit Red Wings in 2008, they came back, rematch of that Stanley Cup Final, and ended up winning. Unfortunately, Marian Hossa was on the losing side of both of them, but thankfully, you being a Chicago native and first loving the Blackhawks before, he was able to get his cup there in 2010 for him. But just for the Panthers to just get back here too for them, and just the mission of them getting here, and you've been rightfully so. You've been really hard on the guys like Sasha Barkovs and the Aaron Ekblads of the world, and you were one of the last people to blame Sergei Bobrovsky when he first got here. I mean, it was a really tough first year, but we were talking about all the defense for the Panthers. I mean, think about how Mike Matheson played a big role for the Florida Panthers back in year one of Sergei Bobrovsky's contract. Keith Yandel was in the mix too. Just how different this team was with Bill Zito coming into the mix. Now it's like a big complete 180 for what the Panthers were. And we were talking pre-recording. You moved here right before the Florida Panthers inception. You dealt with all the bad years too. So how are you feeling about just the Panthers getting back to this moment? The whole comparing 2009 and also just the turnaround of this franchise overall.
I've watched a lot of hockey in my life, more than I could probably remember. But one of the hardest things to do is to get to the Stanley Cup Final, number one. It's even harder to win it, but it's even more difficult to come back 2 years in a row, especially if you lost the first time, right? The energy that you have to spend, the focus that you have to have, the injuries that you have to avoid. I'm not saying everything has to be absolutely perfect, because no season is ever 100% perfect. You're not going to win all 82 games. You're not going to skate through the entire playoffs most of the time, right? it takes so much to get here, and these guys should be very proud of themselves, but I know their work is not done, and I think they feel it too. And to get this far 2 years in a row, it takes a lot. And I think, maybe a couple of years ago we were talking in our chat that the window for this team is now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just because of where, Sasha Barkov is in his career, Ekblad. I mean, this time right now is theirs, and they have to absolutely take advantage of it. And I don't care who they play. I really don't, whether it's Dallas or whether it's Edmonton. It'll be a little bit of a different game, regardless of who they play. Dallas plays one style, Edmonton plays, a totally different style. The Panthers just have to play their game and not fall into any traps. Same old stupid rules we always talk about. Stay out of the penalty box. Don't make dumb mistakes, right? Keep your head on straight. If they keep playing like they're playing right now, I think, we can be pretty confident that they're going to do very, very well. I'm not jinxing anybody, so that's about as much of a advantage I'm going to say.
Yeah, and for the Panthers, for them to get to this point, for them I mean, listen, windows can open and windows can shut very quickly. I mean, and also when you think about cap leagues where you have to pay guys too. I mean, Paul Maurice even jokingly says about guys having an attitude when it comes to UFAs coming up. He's like, oh, when someone's in a contract negotiation, he has such an attitude. Mostly talking about Sam Reinhart, but he has also picked on the guys like Brandon Montour too. So it's like it kind of feels like a now or never for the Panthers, because I mean, you still have someone like Anton Lundell coming up as an RFA. You're likely not bringing Tarasenko no matter what happens. But speaking of Tarasenko too, I mean, what an incredible way to end a 8-game goal drought with a little dump in the zone. Eetu Luostarinen, the last trade deadline that Dale Talon had bringing him in. So there's still a little bit of effects of Dale Talon on this team. Yeah, the Bobrovsky contract, drafting Barkov and Ekblad, but also but Bill Zito making this move for Tarasenko. For that dump in and then that backdoor feed to Tarasenko to break it, and it's just like, oh, you were just starting to feel it, and even that in itself, it makes this trade so much worth it based on the veteran experience that Vlad brings here.
Well, and that's the beauty of this team. You've got young guys who haven't necessarily been here before. Okay, they were here. Some of them were here last year. But you also have the veterans who know what it takes to go through a playoff run. And Barkov's been through it now a few times. Ekblad's been through it for a few times. Sam Bennett, Bobrovsky has been through it. And I don't know that he got enough credit for this series. I mean, whatever everybody was listening to, whether you're listening to ESPN or Sportsnet, Igor played great, but Bob played extremely well and did what he had to do. And imagine if we didn't have Bobrovsky in goal, where we would be. So I think he deserves some credit. He had a phenomenal game tonight. I think he also played very, very well Thursday night. And if not for him, I don't think we'd be here.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of Igor, the frustration that happened at the end, where you feel like everything was just at the breaking point, where he shoved Erod at the very end. Erod has had he's received quite a few hits. One from Jacob Trouba earlier in the series. But speaking of Jacob Trouba, I mean, that hip check that he went to on that give and go from him and Bennett and Erod. Oh, that looks really bad. I mean, the New York City Transit is supposed to be reliable, but the Trouba train definitely off the tracks on that one for him. So just the fact that you're able to just frustrate guys, piss people off, and it's crazy because you think about just the identity that the Panthers brought. I mean, we speak about Matthew Tkachuk, but also it still goes all the way back to that very first trade of Bill Zito bringing in Patrick Hornquist. Yeah, he hasn't played since January of 2023, but just those ripple effects of trades, and then some guys who didn't work out in other places, because the Panthers are, in a way, constructed very different than any NHL teams. Very few guys who are homegrown guys and guys who were just given chances from that maybe didn't play big roles elsewhere, but still maybe had a little bit moments. You mentioned you love Sam Bennett. Playoff Sam has been a thing even before he got here too. So that's another thing. So it's just a matter of Bill Zito. He has the Midas touch.
He's done a great job. I mean, to be able to pluck players, Sam Bennett, Carter Verhaeghe,
Mm-hmm.
and Sam Reinhart is a very good player, but he was toiling away in Buffalo, going nowhere. I mean, what a steal to grab him. It's going to be pretty damn hard to keep him,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going to see, transpires over the summer. But you're right. The window for a lot of these guys as a unit together, this is it. This next series, it has to be won. It has to be won so that they can get that win under their belt. Will they ever come back? Who knows? To get to 2 Stanley Cup Finals 2 years in a row is really hard. I don't know if you can do it 3 times in this era, just because of, like you said, with the cap space, trying to re-sign guys. It's going to be very hard to keep this exact same team together going into next year.
That might have happened recently, but not Stanley Cup Final, Eastern Conference Final, back to back in the New York Islanders. So it's hard to get back, and now it looks like doesn't even look like the New York Islanders are going to even be a team that could even get past round 1 or round 2, even with how many long-term contracts that they've committed to after making those runs too. So that's another thing. That's why this is their time. But we're going to transition over to segment number 3, where we're going to discuss more about the Panthers' mindset in the Prince of Wales Trophy ceremony after clinching their spot in the Stanley Cup Final. We're going to discuss that and more next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Segment number 3 here on this Sunday, June 2nd edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day here on a Sunday, and breaking down this 2-1 victory for the Florida Panthers over the New York Rangers to clinch their spot in the Stanley Cup Final for the 2nd consecutive season. And man, what a great time to be a Florida Panthers fan. And Frank, even before the game started, I never said this publicly. I didn't want to say in a preview show, but I always kept it here. How the Florida Panthers clinched their spot in the Stanley Cup Final. I never really cared whether or not they touched the Prince of Wales trophy. Yes, they did it in 96 and lost. Yes, they did it last year and lost. But I can understand the mindset too, with a unfinished business / act like you've been there before. And now with a good majority of the core having that experience and something of remember this feeling of when they did that handshake line at T-Mobile Arena last year. And honestly, you got to give credit to the leadership of the Panthers. It's not about necessarily touching a trophy. It's not about that, but it's just saying, hey, the job's not done.
Absolutely. And hockey is a very superstitious sport, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think the NHL player has more superstitions than you can combine all the other sports put together, although I think baseball will give it a good run. But it's always been a rule that you don't touch your conference trophy before you play in the Cup Final. You just don't. Now, you could call it arrogance when they do. You could call it so what. But honestly, not touching it, that is the right thing to do. And because you don't want to blame superstition or bad luck on anything because you did touch the trophy. But I give them a lot of credit for sticking to their guns and not touching that trophy, because that's not the thing that they want, right? Obviously, it helps you get there. You want the Stanley Cup. That's the trophy that you want to raise.
Yeah, so it's and now that you have a taste of it again, a chance to get there, and everything resets too. That's the thing. when you think about the New York Rangers and them going 7-0, and then all the 7 consecutive game 5s of them going back to the 80s for them, and just for the Panthers going into this, and with resetting yourself every series. I mean, still one power play goal for the Rangers in the entire series, more shorthanded goals than they did power plays. I'm going to double check to see how many power plays there were tonight, because I believe there were only 2. Yeah, there are only 2, and
I think they were early in the game.
Yeah,
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but also, it's not really about this is something that Jeff Merrick also talked about in 32 Thoughts. It's not necessarily the referees adjusting to the style of play, but it's also the players adjusting to the style of play
Absolutely.
too. You're not doing so much to try to make a mistake or overcommitting. And even Paul Maurice even spoke about how you're not trying too much to get up in the zone and create something off the rush. You're letting it come to you, and then when you have that opportunity, to pounce on it too. So that's another thing about not forcing things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, tonight's game was a pretty clean game. There was nothing questionable that happened. And you're right, they just kind of fall into I don't want to call it a style of play, but they're just letting the game flow. No need for any extracurriculars. The game probably could have gotten ugly towards the end, right? Even when Igor tried to face wash Rodrigues, but I think it was a really well played game for an elimination game. The Rangers could have come out with a little more angst in them, I suppose, and try to throw the Panthers off of their game, but then that would have thrown the Rangers off of their game as well. So smartly played on both ends. Obviously, the better team won, and I feel that the Panthers were the better team throughout the series. Couple games didn't look that way, but those were some bad breaks, and that's why you play it.
Yeah, and both were overtime winners too. Yeah. So and parts even before where the Panthers were controlling the play, you felt like that this possibly could have ended earlier. But hey, listen, you don't question the journey. I've just don't question the journey for this Florida Panthers team, but. Dallas or Edmonton, I mean, regardless, I think they got to be the favorite going into the series. And I'm not just saying this as someone who hosts a Panthers podcast and someone who's from South Florida too, but just how they got here. The Edmonton hasn't been there, hasn't been this far before. They've been to a Western Conference Final. I'm not making any series predictions right now, but last time they got swept against Colorado. Dallas is a little bit of a different team this time around, a little bit younger, built through the draft too. A lot of veterans and guys who built through the draft, especially their 2021 draft, incredible by Jim Nill. But you gotta figure that the Panthers, they're like you said, they're not going to change their style of game for anyone on the opposition. They are going to stick to them.
I mean, Edmonton obviously has McDavid and Draisaitl, but I don't think their goaltending scares me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Dallas plays a heavy game. They have good goaltending, but Jake Ottinger can be hot and cold, right? But then Jamie Benn sometimes loses his head. Joe Pavelski hasn't won anything, been to the finals at least once or twice, and our old friend Pete DeBoer has been to the finals how many times?
Yeah.
3, I think. Hasn't won. So I think everything is in the Panthers' favor, regardless of which team that they're going to play, as long as they stick to their game plan. And I think Paul Maurice is the right guy to make sure that happens. He knows when to press the button, and he knows when to lay off the button.
And I would love, because Paul Maurice and Pete DeVore are just good friends, I would just love to see the storylines that would go if it is those two in the final. And hey, Chris Knobloch on the other side for the Edmonton Oilers, coming in after being in Hartford, being McDavid's coach in the OHL too. It's going to be interesting to see the coaching side of things for both these teams, regardless of who wins in Game 6 on Sunday night. So that's another thing. Oh, before we get out of here, Frank, the Panthers played once again in June. June 1st was I'm try to do my math here. 28 years from the day since the Florida Panthers went into Pittsburgh and won Game 7 to advance to the Stanley Cup Final that year. So another memorable moment in the history of the Florida Panthers in June. And here's also another stat from Arda Ocal of ESPN. The following teams have never played an NHL game in the month of June: Seattle Kraken, Minnesota Wild, Columbus Blue Jackets, Arizona Coyotes / NHL in Utah, and the Toronto Maple Leafs.
That's a great stat. Oh, man. That's a great stat. I'm glad you brought that up.
I wanted to relate it to the month of June. And hey, when the Leafs won their cups, the schedule did not go all the way to June at that point back in the 60s too. But
barely went into May.
Yeah, so that's another thing for that. But man, the Panthers, they're Eastern Conference champions once again. Just that rolling off my tongue just feels so good. And here's the thing, Frank. They're gonna get a week off too. They got 9 days off last go round.
Yeah.
But this time their opposition is gonna get possibly the same amount. We didn't even see the schedule for VGK after VGK Dallas last year. Really, they said, "Oh, if the series ends, it's going to be this kind of schedule. If it's not, it's going to be this." So the schedule's been set for a little bit. Also, arena availability has a lot to do with it too. So their opposition's going to get the rest too. So that's not going to be a topic of conversation going into next Saturday neither. Game 1 being next Saturday. The Panthers can still have home ice if it's Edmonton too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the only thing that is an unknown is, until that conference final has been decided, is do we have home ice advantage or not? Obviously you want it, but I don't think the Panthers have any problem winning on the road. And I don't think either of those two arenas are that, boisterous where it's going to throw you off your game. I mean, look, you're in the Stanley Cup Final. It's going to be noisy no matter where you are, whether you're at home or whether you're on the road. And these guys are professionals. They're used to playing, so they're going to get through it.
And they won 2 games at the Garden.
Yeah,
so allowed,
right.
So what makes you think they can't do it in another barn, even in a Canadian barn, if it happens to be Edmonton too? But Frank,
when was the last time a Canadian team won the cup?
The year I was born.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. A few months before I was born. Sorry.
Okay.
Even worse. So 1993. So yeah. So
that's a long time.
Yes, very long time. First year with Gary Bettman being the commissioner too. So maybe it's the curse of Bettman. So who knows?
Yeah.
But Frank, I want to thank you so much once again for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, recapping this 2-1 Panthers win over the Rangers for another Eastern Conference championship. Tell everybody where they can follow you online.
You just follow me on Twitter, Frank Rekas. It's that simple. And stop by, say hello, and let's have a great chat, and let's get these next 4 wins.
Let's win the cup. But we got a whole week of prep right before that. So can't wait. So Frank, thank you so much once again, my friend.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey, Flip Livingstone, and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you once again for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. So I'm Armando Velez with Frank Rekas, and you've been listening to Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.